All right, so let's talk about middleware. What we're going to be using middleware for is to track our references. So when we have a user send a link with their unique code, we want to track those codes and still allow it to be fairly easy and straightforward for a user to do. In order for us to do that, we're going to use something called middleware. Now, if we look on this diagram that Django has for us, this is kind of what middleware does. So every time you request a web page, so whether it's codingforentrepreneurs.com or google.com, that's an HTTP request. We also call it just a request. So whenever a request happens, that goes to a view, and then we get a response, which would be the page or the code for the page as an HTTP response. So this happens every time. Now middleware happens right between that, and it can happen on a request, and it can also happen on a response. So we can do stuff within this request, right? So we can process this request and change anything that we want about it, and then that would be able to be used within our view or any of our views, depending on how we actually set it up. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to make custom middleware. Now, Django comes with middleware already: common middleware, session middleware, CSRF middleware, and authentication messages. So there's all these middleware that you can actually stack in here that's pre-built into Django. And if we look at our settings file in our middleware classes, we'll see, it's just right down a little bit, we'll see the things that come default to every Django project when we start it. These middleware classes make our site more user-friendly and just also add some security, and they do all types of things. Like, for example, session middleware is really good for authentication, and then using, like, let's say, for instance, you want to know how long somebody's session was or how long they were actually active on logged in. This is kind of something you'd be able to use for that session middleware. CSRF token, if you remember that from our forms, when we did our forms in the HTML. So I'm actually going to show you. So in home, this token right here, that is actually works in conjunction with this. So to make sure that that token is working correctly and all that. Authentication middleware, user login and log out. Message middleware, we'll use this quite a bit, and in all of our projects, like in general, we use messages middleware. We will also use it in this project specifically, and it's kind of like doing notifications. It's not quite like doing messages between like you and I. It'd be more of like notifications for if any action happens and you want to let the user know of these actions. So if they fill out a form and you want to give them a general message that would be accessible than just that one form page, you would use messages. And we'll see what that means in just a moment. So now let's kind of think about what we want to do on our page. And if we go into Launch with Code and we go in and enter our email, we get this share page. Now the share page is good because it has a unique code here, and this page itself is public, right? So once we go live and we have our domain set up, this page will be able to be seen by anyone. Now for this sharing link, we want to actually use this actual ID or this code here, this reference code. We'd want to use that for whenever this particular page is shared or this user's email is shared. Well, not their email, but their reference to their email is shared. So their unique code. Once that's shared, we want to actually track those things. And what you'll see a lot on websites is using something like this, where it's a reference and then $ref equals to ABC. Now, what this allows us to do is we can actually get what that information is at any time. Now, the reason we'd use middleware instead of a normal view is because if for some reason they had the reference here as well, we would want to get it. And depending on if they go to any of the pages on our website, we'd still want to get that reference to make sure that we know that we're tracking the person who sent them there in the first place, even if the link is kind of messed up maybe. So we'll see what that does in just a second. So in order for us to make middleware, we just have to create a brand new file for it. So inside of LWC, or the Django configuration folder, we're going to make a new file here, and I'm going to just call it middleware.py. Middleware.py. All right, so inside of middleware, we're going to create our refer middleware. So class refer middleware. And I'm just giving these, like refer middleware is just a name that I'm giving middleware.py. It's just better practice to call it middleware.py if that's what we're using it as. So I just leave it in as middleware. And also to note, you don't have to put it in the Django configuration folder. You could put it in the joins folder if you wanted to. But for me, referring middleware or like a reference ID, if I'm going to use that, I want to use it on all my pages or any of my pages. So if I want to track who's sharing and doing a lot of that stuff, I'll use it on every page. Therefore, I'm going to put it in my Django, the root settings folder. All right, so now that I have this, all I have to do is define a function called process request. So this function is a middleware function that allows me to process the request, whatever the request is. So let's actually write it in, and I'm just going to hit print request. All right, so this is going to print out the request every single time a request is made. So we have to hook in this middleware with our settings. I'm going to put it at the very bottom because we want everything else to load first. Now, if you have anything that overrides any of these settings, meaning you did some research on these settings and you understand how they work and you are confident in actually overriding them, then you can put it forward or first. If you aren't confident in overriding these things, put it at the end, because I would suggest putting it at the end because, frankly, you don't know what little functions in here that you absolutely might need. So it's better practice to actually put it down at the bottom so all these other ones are processed first. So now we just write the location of our new middleware. So lwc.middleware, and it's .ref middleware. Wait, let's actually look. Refer middleware. Sorry about that. So refer middleware. Make sure there's a comma at the end. All right. So we look at our middleware process request, and it's going to print out the request. And also in our views, we want to make sure that we uncomment out any print statements that we may have in here, just so we can make sure that our new printing is clean. I'm going to close out the home.html too. All right, so and also, wait, so this also includes our home page, I believe, and yes, it does. So we don't actually need any more other work than that. All right, so now that we're here, let's do a refresh, and we can see that the request was printed out, and that's because of the middleware. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add in ref equals to ABC. All right, so again, it prints out the request. And so now what we want to do is actually in our middleware, we want to get, so I'll do try print request.get ref. And I refresh, error occurred. Oops, I need to put an exception in here. And if it's not there, we'll just hit accept pass. All right, so now that I have ref, I'm going to actually uncomment this too. All right, so I refresh in here, and we notice it says ABC. It also says none, so it's going to say it twice because depending on how your requests are working, it might actually run a request 2 times, not once. All right, so now that we have this, we can say ref ID equals to that. So once we have this ref ID, we can actually do some stuff with it. We can also add an empty string here, and hopefully that will actually print ref ID. Actually, I'll put ref ID equals to false here. All right, so now let's try it again. And there we go. So actually putting that extra parentheses allows us to have an empty spot there too. All right, so if we take this ref away, it doesn't print anything, right? So it prints nothing. And that's exactly what we want it to do. All right. So now let's actually go to our unique link here, and I'll do $ref equals to ABC, refresh, and ABC is still coming through, right? So we see it here, here, here. So no matter how many times I do it, it's still going to come through, which is great. And you can actually chain these things together. So another ref equals to another. And let's grab this another ref. And we're going to put it into our middleware. So request.get and another ref. Okay. Go back into Chrome. And we have to add in another ref again. And we look at our print statement, and we now see that we have these two arguments that are coming through. So this is a nice way to, kind of get other data that we could put right in the URL. Now, of course, for our purposes, we only want the ref, and we want the ref that's going to be related to some object, right? So let's go ahead and we're going to just get rid of this other one because we don't need it. Now, of course, if you were using another one, you would be able to actually show that other one, whatever it is. And one other thing that you can note is if we don't get it, you actually can just do this. You don't have to put that try statement in because it's either going to get ABC or nothing. And that's essentially what this is doing. It's getting the ref or it's getting nothing. And that's why I would print ABC. Now, if I just did this, more than likely it'll run some errors. Well, I guess not. It just says none. All right, so let's just leave it as that. All right, so this is basically getting the reference ID that we want. So we can get rid of all this. And we can use this same type of thing for all types of variables if we want to. But for us, we want to actually get the user that is associated, or the email that was signed up for this reference, or at least try to get it. Like if there is one, we will need to actually try and get the reference or the person who actually signed up that reference. So let's go ahead and import our email user. So it's join, of course. So inside of middleware, from joins, import from joins.models, import join. And now what we're going to do is try. We'll say object equals to join.objects.get, and it's going to be ref ID equals to ref ID. Now in our models, we're putting it equal to that, right? Just like that. And except, so if it doesn't exist, we'll just say object is none. And then if the object exists, we'll say if object. Then we'll say request.session ref equals to object. So this is setting a session variable, spell correctly. This is setting a session variable of reference to the object that it's referencing. So basically what this means is we can now hook in the reference of whoever joined it in here. I'm actually going to do I'm going to do object.id because object itself, the Unicode, returns the email, and we don't necessarily need the email out there and floating in our session. We just realistically just need the ID. So now we have this. So we have this session variable, and we can use this session variable in other places, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. All right, so we save this. Go back in here. We have now our code here. This is the code that we'll be using. So go ahead and copy that. And we're going to go $ref equals to that. And actually, before I even run that, I'm just going to print the object to make sure that it is there so we can see it. All right. So saved it. Make sure the server is running still. Press enter. Doesn't look like a whole lot happened, but we do see that, hey, codingforentrepreneurs@gmail.com is now showing up. Perfect. So I can actually uncomment it, or I'm going to comment out that print statement, and I'm going to comment out this print statement. Now you're like, okay, well, cool. So now I can get the object ID. So this object ID, now we can use this request.session and anything that uses or handles the request. So our view, see how that we have requests in different views? We can actually now grab that specific session from our middleware in there. So what we'll do now is I'm going to just copy this. For now, on our home page, I'll just go try. So refer user equals to request.session.ref, or refer ID. Let's just do that. And we'll go accept. Refer ID is none. All right, and then we'll do print refer ID. Okay, so now we're going to see kind of what happens here. Okay, so if I refresh, it's there. And I printed the refer ID, and that ID itself is actually 1 because there's only 1 there. Cool, so let's actually just add print the ID is. Got to turn that into a string. Okay. And now we got the ID is 1. Okay, so this means this is a join ID, right? So like if it's a join model, so we can actually get that model, that person, and we can set it to stuff when we get there. For now, we're not actually going to get there quite yet, but we can see that this actually does work. But I'm actually going to take this try statement one step further, and I'm actually going to get the join object that refers to that. So object equals to join.objects.get ref ID equals to refer ID. And then instead of printing the ID is, I'll just say print the object is, and I'll do %s for string substitution object.email. Okay, so let's refresh in here again. Object reference before local assignment. So this error right here happened. If we look in our try statement, you should be able to guess why it happened, and that's because of our except statement. So try, in one part of try it works, in another part it doesn't. So in this except it doesn't actually work. So I'm actually going to just cut this for now and just put it there, and do a refresh in here. Cool, and we see now that looks like we're not getting the right response. So let's actually see why. By taking it out of the try statement. Okay, print, and let's move these things over here. Do a refresh. Join matching query does not exist. So refer ID, oh, here's the reason, is because I actually put refer ID when it should be just ID. So this is actually kind of confusing. So maybe we should call this join ID. And this join ID, just so we don't confuse ourselves later, because realistically it is a join ID, it's not a reference ID. And then we'll change the session also to join ID ref. That's what I'll call it, join ID ref instead of just ref. So join ID reference will be the session name for it. All the other stuff's fine. So this just makes it a little bit easier on me so I can read it later. Now if I do a refresh this time, it says the object is. Okay, cool. So if the object doesn't exist, we don't want an error to come up. We just want to put it back into this try statement so an error does not come up. And instead of showing join ID being none, I'm actually going to just change it to object is none. So if the object is something, so if we can get a instance of join, then we set the object to it. If we cannot, then we say none. And that would include both of these things in that statement, because if this is none, this will be none, so everything on that case will also be none. Okay, so that is middleware. You can use this on all types of things, right? It's not really just for what we're doing here, and in fact we wouldn't necessarily always have to set this reference ID as a session. You could set it as a cookie too, so it stays within their browser. Where sessions stay, they actually do have storage inside of our server, so it's not only on their browser. So these sessions themselves, if they clear out their cookies, it will clear out their session, but it's also nice to have record of their session on our end versus just on cookies. Also, there's some better security stuff for sessions as well. All right, so that is it for middleware. Now what we need to do is actually build something in our models that allow us to track our friends that we sign up. So our friends that join. So like join friends or friends join or something like that. So we can track what this stuff is doing, right? So if we can get that reference ID, we should associate it to one of these joins, right? We don't want to associate it to something empty. We want to associate it to the join itself. So it's kind of like the email that is part of this join is the owner of a group of joins. of other joins as well. All right, so if you have any questions so far, let me know. Otherwise, let's keep going.